In a moment, you'll dive into a profound enigma. Why did the Jewish people reject Jesus as the Messiah despite the overwhelming evidence of his miracles? Jesus performed incredible feats, healing the sick, raising the dead, and fulfilling numerous prophecies, yet many Jewish leaders and followers did not accept him. This video examines 4 pivotal reasons for this rejection, including misinterpretations of prophecies, accusations of blasphemy, challenges to established religious traditions, and a stubborn resistance to undeniable miracles. Join us as we unravel this compelling mystery and explore its impact on faith and prophecy. The first significant factor in the rejection of Jesus was the misinterpretation of messianic prophecies. The Jewish people had a specific vision of what the Messiah would be like, an earthly king who would liberate them from Roman oppression and restore the Davidic kingdom. This expectation was deeply rooted in their traditions and scriptures. The prophecies they read suggested a triumphant, conquering figure rather than the humble servant Jesus presented himself as. Jesus' failure to fulfill these anticipated roles led many to dismiss him as the Messiah, as he did not meet their preconceived expectations of political and military power. Another crucial reason was the accusations of blasphemy that Jesus faced. By claiming to be the Son of God and equating himself with the divine, Jesus challenged the core monotheistic beliefs of Judaism. The Jewish leaders, who were deeply committed to maintaining the purity of their religious doctrine, saw Jesus' claims as a direct threat to their faith and an affront to the one true God. This perceived blasphemy was not only a violation of religious laws, but also a catalyst for his rejection. The intense religious and cultural significance of these claims made it nearly impossible for many to accept Jesus as the Messiah. Jesus' teachings also posed significant challenges to established religious traditions. He often criticized the Pharisees and other Jewish authorities for their rigid adherence to laws and rituals, arguing that they had lost sight of the essence of the faith. Jesus' emphasis on internal righteousness and personal relationship with God contrasted sharply with the traditional focus on external adherence to religious laws. This confrontation with established norms led to considerable resistance from religious leaders who saw Jesus as undermining their authority and disrupting the societal order. Despite the undeniable miracles Jesus performed, including healing the sick and raising the dead, many Jewish leaders and followers remained skeptical. This stubborn resistance can be attributed to a combination of psychological, social, and theological factors. The miraculous acts did not align with their expectations of how the Messiah should reveal himself. Additionally, the political and social climate of the time created an environment of distrust and hostility toward anyone who could potentially disrupt the status quo. Even in the face of miracles, the prevailing skepticism and entrenched beliefs often overshadowed the evidence of Jesus' divine power. Theological discrepancies also played a significant role in the rejection of Jesus. Traditional Jewish beliefs were centered around a strict interpretation of monotheism, and the concept of a divine Messiah who was both human and divine was difficult to reconcile with existing beliefs. The notion of the Trinity, which emerged later in Christian theology, was particularly challenging for Jewish monotheists. Jesus' teachings about his divine nature and relationship with God were seen as contradictory to the foundational principles of Jewish faith, making it challenging for many to accept his claims. Political concerns were also a significant factor in the rejection of Jesus. The Jewish leaders were highly attuned to the potential political implications of Jesus' teachings and actions. His growing popularity and the movement he inspired had the potential to incite unrest and provoke a harsh response from the Roman authorities. The fear of political instability and the risk of Roman retaliation contributed to the rejection of Jesus as the Messiah, as religious leaders prioritized maintaining peace and order over accepting a potentially revolutionary figure. The socio-economic implications of accepting Jesus as the Messiah were also considerable. Jesus' teachings often challenged the social and economic structures of the time, advocating for the poor and marginalized and critiquing the wealthy and powerful. For those who benefited from the existing socioeconomic system, Jesus' message posed a direct threat to their status and livelihood. The resistance to Jesus was, therefore, not only a religious issue, but also a matter of preserving economic and social advantages. The influence of long-standing Jewish traditions and customs cannot be underestimated in understanding the rejection of Jesus. The Jewish faith was deeply rooted in a long history of rituals, customs, and interpretations that shaped the community's identity. Jesus' new teachings and reinterpretations of the law challenged these deeply ingrained traditions, leading many to resist his message. The established religious practices and customs created a barrier to accepting new interpretations that deviated from the norm. The role of Jewish leaders in the rejection of Jesus was significant. The religious authorities, including the Sanhedrin, were deeply invested in maintaining their religious and social authority. Jesus' challenge to their authority and his growing influence among the people threatened their power and position. The leaders' efforts to discredit Jesus and suppress his movement were driven by a desire to protect their own status and control over religious and societal matters. The interpretation of Jesus' miracles was also a point of contention. While Jesus performed many miracles, the nature and purpose of these acts were often misunderstood or misinterpreted. Some saw them as mere wonders without recognizing their deeper significance as signs of his divine authority and messianic role. The miracles, rather than serving as irrefutable proof of his identity, were sometimes viewed with suspicion or seen as magic tricks rather than divine interventions. The historical context of messianic expectations plays a crucial role in understanding the rejection of Jesus. During the time of Jesus, there were many competing messianic claims and figures, each promising to fulfill different aspects of the messianic prophecy. The diverse and often conflicting expectations created a complex environment where Jesus' claims had to compete with other messianic movements and interpretations. The prevailing expectations of a political or military Messiah made it challenging for Jesus to be recognized as the true Messiah. The influence of Greco-Roman culture on Jewish society also contributed to the rejection of Jesus. The cultural and philosophical environment of the time was characterized by a variety of religious and philosophical ideas that competed with Jewish teachings. The blending of these ideas with Jewish thought created a complex religious landscape where Jesus' teachings and claims had to contend with prevailing Greco-Roman beliefs and practices. This cultural interplay often led to confusion and resistance to Jesus' message. The impact of Roman rule on Jewish society cannot be ignored in understanding the rejection of Jesus. The Roman occupation of Judea created a tense and volatile political situation. The Jewish people were under constant pressure from their Roman rulers, and any movement that threatened to disrupt the established order was met with suspicion and resistance. Jesus' teachings, which implied a new order and a different kind of kingdom, were seen as potentially destabilizing in the context of Roman rule. Divergent views on the kingdom of God also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. Jesus' concept of the kingdom of God was often interpreted in spiritual rather than political terms. For many Jews, the kingdom of God was expected to be a tangible, political reality that would bring about an earthly reign of justice and peace. Jesus' emphasis on a spiritual kingdom and the internal transformation of individuals did not align with these expectations, leading to a disconnect between his message and the prevailing understanding of the kingdom. The role of other Jewish messianic movements and figures also influenced the rejection of Jesus. During the time of Jesus, there were several other individuals and movements claiming to be the Messiah or to have messianic significance. The presence of these competing figures created a situation where Jesus' claims had to be evaluated against others who also promised salvation or liberation. The multiplicity of messianic claims made it difficult for Jesus to be recognized and accepted as the singular Messiah. The influence of Pharisaic tradition on Jewish thought and practice contributed to the rejection of Jesus. The Pharisees were a prominent Jewish sect, known for their strict interpretation of the law and their emphasis on oral traditions. Jesus' teachings often challenged Pharisaic traditions and interpretations, leading to conflict and opposition. The Pharisaic perspective on law and tradition shaped the reception of Jesus' message, creating a barrier to his acceptance among those who adhered to these traditions. The Sadducees, another influential Jewish sect, also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. Unlike the Pharisees, the Sadducees were more focused on the temple and the priesthood, and were generally more conservative in their religious views. Jesus' criticism of the temple and his actions related to it, such as the cleansing of the temple, were seen as threats to the Sadducean order. The Sadducees' opposition to Jesus was driven by a desire to protect their religious and institutional interests. Jesus' radical teachings on love, forgiveness, and inclusivity were often seen as challenging and disruptive. His emphasis on loving one's enemies, forgiving sins, and welcoming outsiders was in stark contrast to the prevailing attitudes of justice and retribution. These radical teachings, while revolutionary, were difficult for many to accept and integrate into their existing belief systems. The radical nature of Jesus' message contributed to the resistance he faced. The perception of Jesus as a threat to the existing religious and social order also played a significant role in his rejection. Jesus' growing popularity and the movement he inspired were seen as potential threats to the stability and control of the religious authorities. The fear of losing influence and power led many to actively oppose and reject Jesus, viewing him as a destabilizing force rather than a legitimate Messiah. Jewish apocalyptic expectations also influenced the rejection of Jesus. Many Jews anticipated a dramatic end-time scenario in which the Messiah would play a central role in bringing about a cosmic upheaval and the final victory of God's kingdom. Jesus' focus on personal and spiritual transformation did not align with these apocalyptic expectations, leading some to dismiss him as failing to meet their eschatological hopes. The impact of Jesus' death on the cross was also a factor in his rejection. The concept of a suffering and crucified Messiah was difficult for many to accept, as it contradicted their expectations of a victorious and triumphant Messiah. The crucifixion was seen as a humiliating and disgraceful end for someone who claimed to be the Messiah. This perception of Jesus' death contributed to the overall rejection of his messianic claims. The role of Roman authorities in the events surrounding Jesus' death also influenced the rejection of his messianic claims. The involvement of the Romans in condemning Jesus to crucifixion and the political implications of his execution added to the complexity of the situation. The Roman involvement in Jesus' death was interpreted by some as a validation of his claims, while others saw it as a sign of his failure to fulfill messianic expectations. The influence of Jewish exegesis and interpretation of the Scriptures played a role in the rejection of Jesus. The methods and traditions of interpreting the Hebrew Scriptures were deeply ingrained in Jewish thought, and Jesus' reinterpretation of these texts often clashed with established exegesis. The resistance to Jesus was partly rooted in the belief that his interpretations were inconsistent with traditional understandings of the Scriptures. The complexity of messianic identity also contributed to the rejection of Jesus. The concept of the Messiah was multifaceted and included various attributes and roles. Jesus' focus on certain aspects of the messianic identity, while downplaying others, created confusion and disagreement among those who were trying to reconcile his claims with their expectations. The multifaceted nature of the Messiah made it challenging for many to fully accept Jesus as the fulfillment of all messianic prophecies. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, played a central role in the rejection of Jesus. The Sanhedrin's authority and influence over religious and legal matters meant that their rejection of Jesus had a significant impact on the broader Jewish community. The Sanhedrin's decision to condemn Jesus and label him as a heretic or blasphemer set a precedent that influenced the reception of his message among the Jewish people. The influence of Jewish sectarianism also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. The Jewish community was divided into various sects and groups, each with its own interpretations and expectations. The sectarian divisions made it challenging for any single figure, including Jesus, to gain universal acceptance. The diverse and often conflicting views within the Jewish community contributed to the rejection of Jesus as the Messiah. The role of Jesus' disciples and their actions also influenced the rejection of Jesus. The disciples' interpretations and teachings about Jesus' identity and mission were sometimes seen as radical or controversial. The way in which the disciples promoted Jesus' message and the controversies surrounding their actions contributed to the overall perception of Jesus as a divisive figure rather than a universally accepted Messiah. The influence of Hellenistic Judaism on Jewish thought and practice also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. The blending of Greek and Jewish cultural elements created a complex religious environment where Jesus' teachings had to compete with prevailing Hellenistic ideas. The The cultural and philosophical diversity of Hellenistic Judaism influenced the reception of Jesus and his message. The role of rabbinic tradition in shaping Jewish beliefs and practices contributed to the rejection of Jesus. The rabbinic tradition emphasized the interpretation of the law and the teachings of the rabbis, which sometimes conflicted with Jesus' message. The established rabbinic authority and tradition created a barrier to accepting Jesus' new teachings and claims. The perception of Jesus as a political rebel or revolutionary also influenced his rejection. Jesus' actions and teachings were sometimes interpreted as challenging the political status quo and advocating for radical change. This perception of Jesus as a potential political threat contributed to the resistance he faced from both Jewish authorities and the broader community. The influence of Jewish mysticism and esoteric traditions also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. The mystical and esoteric aspects of Jewish thought often focused on hidden knowledge and spiritual experiences, which were different from Jesus' teachings and claims. The divergence between mystical traditions and Jesus' message contributed to the overall skepticism and rejection of his claims. The impact of Jesus' parables and teachings on the nature of the kingdom of God also influenced the rejection of his message. Jesus' use of parables to convey spiritual truths was often seen as enigmatic or obscure. The parables, while profound, were sometimes difficult for the average listener to understand and accept. This difficulty in understanding Jesus' message contributed to the overall rejection of his claims. The role of Jewish ritual purity laws and practices also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. Jesus' interactions with those considered impure or unclean, and his teachings on purity challenged established notions of ritual cleanliness. The perceived violation of these purity laws contributed to the resistance he faced from those who adhered strictly to ritual practices. The influence of Jewish legalism and the emphasis on strict adherence to the law contributed to the rejection of Jesus. The focus on legalistic interpretations and practices created a barrier to accepting Jesus' teachings on grace and forgiveness. The tension between legalistic traditions and Jesus' message of redemption played a role in his rejection. The role of historical trauma and the collective memory of Jewish suffering also influenced the rejection of Jesus. The Jewish people had endured significant hardships and oppression, which shaped their expectations of the Messiah. The failure of Jesus to address these historical traumas in a way that aligned with their expectations contributed to the overall rejection of his claims. The impact of Jesus' teachings on the law and his reinterpretation of Jewish commandments also played a role in his rejection. Jesus' teachings often emphasized the spirit rather than the letter of the law, which challenged traditional interpretations. The perceived threat to established legal norms contributed to the resistance he faced from those who valued adherence to the law. The influence of Jewish political leaders and their interests also contributed to the rejection of Jesus. The political landscape of the time was marked by various factions and power struggles. Jesus' teachings and claims had to contend with the interests and agendas of political leaders who saw him as a threat to their power and influence. The role of Jewish eschatological beliefs and expectations also influenced the rejection of Jesus. The Jewish eschatological framework included specific expectations about the end times and the role of the Messiah. Jesus' teachings and actions did not fully align with these eschatological expectations, leading to skepticism and rejection among those who held to traditional beliefs. The influence of Jewish apologists and defenders of traditional Jewish beliefs also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. Jewish apologists who sought to defend and preserve traditional beliefs often viewed Jesus as a heretic or deceiver. Their efforts to counter his claims and protect the integrity of Jewish teachings contributed to the overall resistance. The role of Jewish cultural identity and the preservation of cultural heritage also contributed to the rejection of Jesus. Jesus' teachings and claims often challenged established cultural norms and practices. The desire to maintain cultural identity and continuity led some to reject Jesus as a disruptive force that threatened their sense of belonging and heritage. The impact of Jesus' interactions with Gentiles and his teachings on inclusivity also played a role in his rejection. Jesus' message of inclusion and acceptance of Gentiles was at odds with the prevailing Jewish attitudes toward non-Jews. The perceived challenge to Jewish exclusivity and identity contributed to the resistance he faced. The influence of Jewish messianic expectation and the specific criteria for the Messiah played a role in the rejection of Jesus. The Jewish expectations included not only the liberation from oppression, but also the restoration of Israel and the fulfillment of certain prophecies. Jesus' failure to meet these specific criteria led many to reject him as the Messiah. The role of Jesus' teachings on forgiveness and reconciliation also influenced the rejection of his message. Jesus' emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation challenged traditional notions of justice and retribution. The radical nature of these teachings created resistance among those who adhered to more conventional views on justice and punishment. The influence of Jewish sectarian conflicts and rivalries also contributed to the rejection of Jesus. The Jewish community was marked by various sectarian conflicts, and Jesus' presence and teachings were perceived through the lens of these rivalries. The sectarian divisions created an environment where acceptance of Jesus was hindered by existing conflicts and tensions. The role of Jesus' relationship with the law and his approach to legal matters also played a role in his rejection. Jesus' reinterpretation of the law and his actions related to Sabbath observance and other legal issues challenged traditional interpretations. The perceived threat to the authority of the law contributed to the resistance he faced. The influence of Jewish philosophical thought in the intellectual environment of the time also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. The philosophical debates and ideas that were prevalent in Jewish thought created a complex backdrop for Jesus' teachings. The divergence between Jesus' message and prevailing philosophical views contributed to the skepticism and resistance he faced. The impact of Jesus' association with outcasts and marginalized individuals also influenced the rejection of his message. Jesus' outreach to those considered unclean or socially unacceptable challenged established social hierarchies and norms. The perceived threat to social order and norms contributed to the resistance he faced from those who adhered to traditional social structures. The role of Jesus' teachings on wealth and material possessions also played a role in his rejection. Jesus' critiques of wealth and materialism challenged the prevailing attitudes toward money and success. The resistance to these teachings was partly driven by the desire to maintain existing economic and social structures. The influence of Jewish religious leadership and their role in shaping public opinion also contributed to the rejection of Jesus. The religious leaders' efforts to discredit Jesus and promote traditional beliefs shaped the perception of his message. The leadership's stance played a significant role in influencing the broader Jewish community's rejection of Jesus. The influence of Jewish educational traditions and their role in shaping religious beliefs also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. Jesus' teachings and interpretations challenged traditional educational methods and approaches. The resistance to these changes was driven by a desire to preserve established educational practices. The role of Jesus' teachings on sin and redemption and their departure from traditional views also contributed to the rejection of his message. Jesus' emphasis on forgiveness and redemption challenged existing views on sin and punishment. The resistance to these teachings was driven by a desire to uphold traditional understandings of sin and justice. The influence of Jewish rituals and symbols and their significance in religious practice also played a role in the rejection of Jesus. Jesus' teachings and actions sometimes challenged traditional rituals and symbols, leading to resistance from those who valued these practices. The desire to preserve established rituals contributed to the overall rejection of his claims. The role of Jesus' relationship with Jewish law and his approach to legal matters also influenced the rejection of his message. Jesus' reinterpretation of legal matters and his teachings on the law challenged traditional interpretations. The resistance to these changes was driven by a desire to maintain established legal practices. The impact of Jesus' teachings on community cohesion and social unity also contributed to his rejection. Jesus' message often challenged established norms and practices, leading to divisions within the community. The resistance to his teachings was driven by a desire to maintain social cohesion and unity. Thank you for watching this in-depth exploration of why many Jewish people rejected Jesus as the Messiah. If you found this video thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content on faith, history, and spirituality. Join the discussion in the comments below and let us know your thoughts on this profound topic.
Thanks for watching our latest videos by clicking on the video in the screen, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.